Now, most of you who have subscribed to my channel know that I do a daily radio show on BBC Radio London, which I've done for quite a few years, but not as long as Robert Elms. Robert does 3.5 hours before me, and he's been there long before me. I was born in Lewisham, and then I went over to the Antipodes, came back, went to Brighton, came back. And during all that time, except he is younger than me, Robert Elms was living in this fantastic city. So he is qualified to write. Well, it is a memoir, I suppose. It's called London Made Us. Yes, a memoir of a shifting shape. See, he's a man of words. A shape-shifting city. When I came here, because I love your book, and it's had rave reviews, by the way, and there are echoes of it in my head now I walk around, because I, like you, celebrate this city. I love it. Yeah. But at the same time, this made me really melancholy, because I've realised how many changes we've experienced. As I said in my introduction, you've lived through them all. Yeah. And you start, and I think this sets a tone, actually. You start with your mum, who I know you absolutely loved, and you start really at the end of her life and the beginning of you thinking about this book.
The book begins on the day my mum died. I'd had conversations with her. She was in UCH dying. So she hadn't gone far. She was born in Pimlico, died by the Euston Road. I was talking about London to her. And even though she didn't have a lot of energy, she wanted to talk. And she said, this isn't my London anymore. She wasn't really complaining. She was just saying she didn't know it. That the London she knew had gone and vanished. And then on the day she died, literally, I was down on trying to take some air, which, on the corner of Tottenham Court Road and Euston Road is not the easiest thing. So I walked a little bit south and I found myself outside Spearmint Rhino, which is, a lap dancing club. And I'm standing there and a cab driver drove by and he shouted out the window, "How's your mum?" I thought, oh. So I just sort of went like that because I didn't want to shout, she's dying over the throb of the traffic. And then he came back round and he pulled over to me and he said, "No, how's your mum?" And I said, "To be honest, mate, she's dying. She won't make it through the day." And he put his hand out of the window and he held my hand. And he said, "London's thinking of her." And I just, kind of almost collapsed. And it just made me think about London. How much London had changed in her lifetime. She was born in 1926, I think it was. How much London had changed in my lifetime. And then how much it had changed in mine. And that so much of the London that she knew had vanished completely. And so much of the London that I grew up in was changing and vanishing and going and morphing into something else. And that's what the book's about, really.
And you say beautifully, actually, when she drifted away, so did your London, to a certain extent, drift away with it. I'm really intrigued by your life because I envied, for lots of reasons, but I envied people like you because you were a city London kid. All we wanted to do was hitch in, but you were actually living this extraordinary life during the 80s, but also childhood. But even then, you were slightly out. I mean, you'd like to have called yourself a Notting Hill kid, but you weren't.
Well, I say in the book, I did not grow up in Notting Hill precisely because my family got slum cleared and town planned away. The Westway literally went over where my family's home had been. So I ended up growing up in NW9, which is not exactly, the centre of the universe. And it felt like that to me. It felt like I needed to get back into town. I always had this real romance about real London as I perceived it. And that was the London of my family. My family had been street traders and market traders and they'd been a very good blimey. And I kind of always had a romance about this city of ours from being very, very early on. And I made sure that I was going to make my place in it.
You wanted to be, was it a recognisable face?
No, you wanted to be a face.
A face.
It's like the title.
What did you mean by that?
Well, a face is an old mod expression. It's why the magazine was called The Face. A face is someone who you see in a crowd, someone whose face you know, someone who can get into clubs by going up and having a word with a doorman, someone who's spotted around town. And that was my only ambition, really. I didn't want to be rich, I didn't want to be famous, I wanted to be a face. I wanted to be someone about town who people would spot and know. And I kind of set about attempting to achieve that.
And he did. I mean, there's a wonderful episode when you're on number 52 in pink trousers with plastic sandals. I mean, this is a kid from Burntwood, isn't it? Burnt Oak. And I know you because you are a real introvert, but at the same time, you dress like a peacock, and you did that from an early age in the suburbs.
From very, very early age. I mean, I had two elder brothers. My brothers were 7 and 10 years older than me, and they were quite sort of tasty, as to use the terminology of the time. And so I was used to kind of thinking, right, when you get to about 14, 15, you dress up and girls will love you and, people will invite you in. And so that's what I did from a very early age. I was everything. I was a skinhead. I was a mod. I was a punk. I was a new romantic. I was a soul boy. And the pink pegs and plastic sandals were my soul boy period, with a big long asymmetric wedge haircut down here. But I still you still had to get the bus. How else was I going to get there?
Robert once told me a story about when he was at a local Lido, whatever, in Speedos with white ankle socks, walking around. Wouldn't you love to have been there? I mean, these are times when you turn London into a village in this book, where you think everywhere is accessible. But even then, as a kid from Burnt Oak, Oxford Street was aspirational, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was where my family, if anything was good, it was Oxford Street. So you went to Oxford Street to see the lights, you went there for Christmas, you went there for the sales. And that was kind of what all of our aspirations were about. I don't think we knew that Bond Street existed. We didn't have the right visa for that one. But Oxford Street was where you went. And then later on it was where you went to buy records and where you went to buy clothes. And so what Oxford Street is now, I must admit, it makes me slightly sad, because I think it has certainly gone down in kind of Londoners' estimation in many ways.
I think there's lots of people write about the characters you describe in this book, and they are all there to be discovered. They're amazing characters that I've never interviewed, that are long gone, actually, since I've been on the station. But they're all within the covers. But one of the things that really springs out is this so-called affordable housing, and the fact that when you were a kid, half of all Londoners lived in council houses or affordable housing. Half of all Londoners. Yeah. That's so that it was estates everywhere. So there was a feeling of camaraderie, wasn't there?
There was, and council. I grew up on a council estate, and my parents were really, really happy to move to one. They moved from Notting Hill to Burnt Oak and thought they'd gone up in the world. And because in those days it was a much more working class city than it is now. Yeah. I mean, we've had sort of periods of the working classes being pushed out further and further out of the centre. And it worries me that it's not just working class people being pushed out now, it's almost everybody. It's young people, it's anyone, it's people who arrive. This city has to be a point of arrival.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It has to be a place where people can begin their adventures and their story.
I think it was Suggs who once said, so I can't believe I'm quoting to you, Suggs, but here we go. I think he said...
He's in the book?
He is in the book. And I remember he said in this film, London, Babylon, he said, London is a carousel. You jump on, you have your time, you jump off, but it will just keep going. But you've always been on it, Robert. The rest of us have jumped bail. You've always been on it.
Just occasionally I feel the need to get off, but not all that. When I do, I go to Spain.
Yeah.
He's absolutely... That's a great analogy to carousel. And the other one I use is that it's a kaleidoscope, and it constantly turns. So if you take your eye off it for a couple of days, you're lost. Well, where did that go? That used to be there, and that was there. And where's the Odeon Marble Arch gone? That was there when I was growing up.
Oh my God, the Odeon Marble Arch, I don't know if you've ever... There's a whacking great hole. It was there one day and gone the next. I mean, I asked about your journey here because you also say in the book, you say, we all were told Charing Cross is the centre of London, but like you, I have it as centre point. Centre point to me.
Centre point is my centre.
It is, and we're just by it here, but we're also in a part of London, if you don't mind my saying so. It's on the border of Covent Garden, which I call Toy Town. I can't stand Covent Garden. But we're also that way into Soho. And
Soho's so precious in the book.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I always said about that is from the 70s onwards, I always thought, well, Covent Garden's for them, meaning tourists, outsiders, whatever, and that's fine. They need a part of the city. And Soho is for us. Because Soho was always the Londoners' place. And that's where I would go and be sure to know some people in the record shops or the pubs. I think it's still true. But I think it's something we've got to fight to keep true.
Yeah, but you say in the book, and definitely now, you don't know what's behind those doors. You did. Even when I hitched in, I thought I knew, but I didn't, because I didn't know Soho the way you did, and it's hanging on by a thread, isn't it?
It is, but it still does it for me. If I'm in the mood and Soho's in the mood, it's still the most dangerous place on earth.
Brilliant.
And that's what I love.
It's a brilliant thing to say. We talked about... before, when I was talking to you about the book, about I am an old hippie, and you all know that, and you talk about
I'm an old skinny,
and he's but you were in a squat, and you say, and let's talk about squatting, because you were saying there's a time when there was, like, at one point, I think in the 70s, 70,000 people were squatting
in London,
some legally, some illegally. That isn't even an option now.
Do you know there was a squatters' estate agents in...
Now you mentioned him. What was his name?
The Rough Tough
Puffy Club or something.
Was he an actor? He was an actor. And he started a squatters' estate agents in Notting Hill. And instead of charging you money, they basically gave you a jemmy and a list of empty properties and said, go and live in there. I mean, how fantastic fantastic was that?
It is brilliant. And you squatted in one of the most famous ones.
It was the Rough Tough Cream Puff Agency.
The Rough Tough Cream Puff Agency. and there was, like, as you say, Boy George, Marilyn, all that
They
lot.
lived in Warren Street.
You and Sade, and there's a piece about her peeing in a bucket, which I'll leave you to read for yourself. I mean, I hope that you had that. That must have been legal, I would imagine. But the squats, and then you say the gentrification, the hippies then came in and they made squats legal and they had their hanging baskets and everything else. And they did, in a way, didn't they?
Well, I just think gentrification is a process, and it starts when artists move in, or creatives move in, or people with ever so lovely haircuts move in. And then the area starts to change. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think gentrification is bad, but it's a double-edged sword. It brings and it takes away. It makes some things better and it makes some things worse. And that's what happens in London all the time. It constantly moves. And it doesn't... what I didn't want to do was write a grumpy old man's book saying everything's worse.
No, and you haven't. And
also, if you've ever ate the food in the 1970s, you'll know that everything isn't worse.
Kraft Dairy Lee, for a start.
Well, first time I ever had a pizza was on Tottenham Court Road.
Right. Can we do this? Because I knew this restaurant. He talks about Pizza Land, where we thought this was the most exotic thing ever, because you had coleslaw and a jacket potato.
They served you pizza with coleslaw and a jacket potato. Now, what Italian has ever eaten
I know.
that?
But we thought this is the best thing ever that's happened in London.
Sophisticated.
Was it? I think you say the whole start of the gentrification, as far as the restaurant was concerned, was the Soho Brasserie.
Yeah.
Which doesn't own this place, by the
No,
way.
it doesn't. It doesn't exist, and it hasn't existed for anymore. It was the first restaurant on Old Compton Street where you got, like, fizzy water in tumblers, and you got waiters with kind of those black things tied around them, and you got the editor of The Face and Julie Birch was sitting in the back bar and jazz playing. And that's what gentrification is about. It's not about the fact that they did liver and bacon better than my mum. It was the fact that you wanted to be there and you wanted to be seen to be there. And I loved it. And I don't, as I say, this is not a campaign against gentrification. It's a campaign against ridiculous flats that no one can afford. Because where are our kids going to live? I've got 3 young London kids. Where are they going to live? That's the important bit. We need to pass it on to the next generation.
I think what's interesting is you don't answer these questions. You don't set out... You're not a historian, and you say that right at the beginning. All you do is tell us your story. And I think when I started by saying it makes you quite emotional, is you realise, although maybe every generation will say it, we had the best time ever in this city, and whether the new generation will or not, I don't know. They'll get something from it, they'll jump on the carousel and then jump off or fall off or whatever. But you don't set out to... the book isn't there to answer these questions.
No.
It's just to say, this is how it was, this is how it started going, and this is where it is now.
It is, and I think, some things are better and some things are worse, but I do think that the London I grew up in was more piratical. It was more punk. Because there were big gaps. It feels now like Central London is a colouring in book where every page has been coloured in. So how do the young contribute? But they are contributing. They're just finding their way in Lewisham or in Tottenham, whereas I was in Soho.
Yeah.
They're moving around, and that's what's so amazing about London. It's like a many-headed hydra. It pops up in all different places.
Yeah. Do you think that it's just going to spread to Ashford? That's my concern.
I suspect it's going to spread to Reading.
Yeah.
I suspect it's already spreading, with little gaps in the middle. It's already spread to Brighton and Hastings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what's happening.
You're right. You get the train out of Victoria, it's nearly all buildings. It's nearly all suburbia, all the way down to Brighton. I asked you this before, and I asked you this on the radio station, and we had such limited time. And there's loads that I can connect with, even though, damn it, you're younger than me, and you've never...
Not much, Joe,
well,
not
no,
much.
But he's a bloke, so it's... But there is one of the most touching scenes where you take your wonderful mum to a Japanese restaurant. And I said to you, do you, and this will be almost my final question to you, do you ever feel that you're a traitor to your roots? And I say that because a wonderful example of this is Robert takes his mum to a Japanese restaurant, and she is so uncomfortable with it that she's spitting out this raw food, and my mother would have done exactly the same. And it dawned on you that you were showing off.
I describe that as my Joe Gargery moment, which is it's Pip from Great Expectations, when Pip gets above his station and gets posh. And there's no doubt I live a very different life from the one that my parents lived or even my brothers lived. I'm not embarrassed by that. London is a place where the whole point of London is that you reinvent yourself. You create who you want to be. It enables you to do that. But the important thing for me is that the next generation of Londoners, wherever they've come from, and one of the things about the book is I say London is being a Londoner is a choice. It's nothing to do with being born under the sound of Bow Bells.
not
That's
now.
rubbish.
Yeah.
You choose to be a Londoner, and the minute you choose to be a Londoner, it has to offer you the ability to reinvent yourself and to become something else, become who you want to be, because that's what this city is for.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, there's a lot I connect with. I never connected with the QPR fascination. But what surprised me was Julian Clary texting me, who's also been on this vlog, saying, "Can you just tell Robert, I'm really enjoying his book. It's very moving." So that's an accolade.
Well,
that really is.
He's my neighbour.
He is your neighbour, yes. And you mentioned, actually, is it the Cypriot, is it the Greek deli?
No, the Portuguese.
The Portuguese, I got that wrong.
The Portuguese coffee shop, well, deli over the corner. No, fantastic. That's our common ground. That's where all the street meets.
Will there be a sequel?
I hope not. It's quite hard work writing a book and presenting a daily radio show.
Yeah, 3.5 hours.
You know, we do a lot of time on the radio,
We
and
do.
then to get up and get to do that was quite tough.
And do you know what's interesting is we both of us celebrate London all the time.
All the time.
But you still, when you read it, this is why everything has shifted a bit. Having read this, I still celebrate London. But as I say, it's all shifted a bit because there are echoes of this wherever I go thinking, yeah, well, he's right, that's gone. Anyway, you can read it for yourself. It's called London Made Us. And you read the bit underneath because it's tongue twisting.
That's called A Memoir of a Shape-Shifting City.
Thank you, Robert.
Elms.